Hello and welcome to EOS Podcast. I'm greeting you to listen to this approximately 1 hour session with my good friend Markus.
Hello everyone.
And my name is Rickard. And you had something you was thinking about this time you wanted to talk about, Markus.
Yeah, I thought maybe I can open up with a quote by a management guru, I guess, from quite old times, like 30s. Peter F. Drucker. It says, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Because, take for example, you can have a very good strategy in an organization or a company, but you don't have a prevailing culture of conscientiousness, like attention to detail, discipline, humbleness, and teachability, for example. So I was thinking that culture is like a very big topic, so it's kind of hard to get very practical about it. But maybe we can just begin in terms of thinking of it as culture is that which is environmentally impulsed, because culture is a result of your environment. But there are different kinds of environment. You can have an intellectual environment that contributes or don't contribute to culture, and you can have an external environment that contributes to creativity or don't contribute to creativity. So those two distinctions, I think, can be useful.
Do you know what the person you just said, do you know what culture that person is thinking about when he's talking about these things?
He was a management guru and a sort of leadership consultant. I would say he basically thinks about it in terms of what is an effective culture, no matter in what domain, field, or area. So basically, I think Peter F. Drucker is pretty much known for focusing on those, call it like universal culture traits that seems to facilitate any sort of endeavor in a group of people or culture. So basically, what a culture that is making people good at adapting to change, to acknowledge mistakes, meaning humbleness. So anything that makes an organization more effective is the kind of culture that Peter F. would focus on.
Is the organization like in a company or in just a small group of friends that want to do something, or is it? You said universal, yeah. So I guess it is that.
I mean, his main emphasis was on building companies, basically, and I mean, I guess organizations too. But there isn't one specific business or domain that he emphasized. He just emphasized the characteristics that create a healthy culture: accountability, responsibility, purpose, meaning, and healthy social relationships. But maybe I can start by asking a little bit about what do you feel should be in a culture in order to make it healthy and good for people? What are the things you want to surround yourself with in terms of like a culture?
Something with a sense of meaning.
Meaning.
And I guess it would be some kind of struggle.
Yeah.
Some kind of emptiness you want to avoid.
Some kind of struggle. So meaning like a group of people pulling together to reach a goal, to face up to a challenge, to... Yeah,
it's like when you are hungry, then you begin to think about, okay, how can I fix that?
That's true.
And that is a little struggle. And the more you wait, the more of struggle it gets.
Yeah.
So I guess that is one example of what makes people react together.
So generally, a culture that makes you stronger and more adept at facing up to issues and solving problems, basically. Is that an accurate description of your sense of culture then a little bit?
Yeah.
Because you said suffering. Or what did you say?
If the suffering doesn't exist in some level, then it's less meaning to the word why or how. Because if everything is fine, why should you bother to do something together?
Absolutely. I think that's definitely a determining factor for a good, healthy culture. Having a sense of shared goals and challenges And if you have to stretch in order to reach for something, you'll use muscles you wouldn't have used if you didn't have to stretch. So I totally get that point. So maybe like a good team that can help you face issues, challenges, and problems in life. I mean, no matter what group setting you find yourself in, you have to be able to work with people and solve problems and go against maybe conditions and limitations you have. Like you could be in a group of people who share a trait of fear of public speaking, for instance, which will create a certain culture in that group, which probably will lead them to, not make contact with people because they fear rejection, not sharing because they feel rejection. All of these common problems are sort of manifested as traits in culture that impact groups. So to lead it back and continue on, what are the good traits we want in a culture? Do you have anything more you'd like to add to that? Like something that would be healthy to be around, basically.
Well, empathy is one big one, I think.
Empathy, emotional IQ.
Yeah, empathy to other people, and that you receive empathy also.
Yeah.
Because I guess if you don't receive empathy so much, then you maybe don't think it's so relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. And encouragement. I find that this is something I have grossly underestimated in my life. I always thought it's kind of a weakness to be dependent on encouragement in order to do stuff, which is sort of my stoic, very exaggerated idea about independence. But I find because I never really had much encouragement in my life, that I had to find ways to encourage myself, which created like a culture, because I was also early on surrounded by people that didn't have much encouragement. And so we started encouraging each other. And that was like a game changer for me, because I just thought I didn't need encouragement. But then when I started getting it, it was like very humbling, and it was nice to just sort of rest for a bit in that sort of support. So I think encouragement can do a lot, and there's a common saying that the person who feels appreciated would always do more than what is asked of them. And I think there's some truth to that, So that would go into meaning for me, sort of the meaning category.
Yeah, and I think the story points also out the difference between being encouraging yourself or being encouraged by others. Because you described the transition from being encouraged by yourself, but I can do this, but then you maybe don't believe yourself because nobody else have told you anything, maybe. But then when a group told you, like, yes, that was good, nice, and then you feel like that the whole group is like in a way celebrating your togetherness, your effort together. Then you feel something stronger, something a little bigger than yourself.
Yeah, and I think that the part of encouragement that is self-willed and that comes from external people, basically, is both are important. It's not either or, but both. And I think probably, I'm not sure, but in my case, I think it was far more important to find ways to encourage myself than being dependent on other people's encouragement, but also recognizing there's a broad spectrum where people are very different. Some people have different phases they need encouragement, others don't, and so on. But what is definitely sure is that encouragement never hurts anyone. It just can't, unless you're like very overbearing and managing. But
if we play with the thought, if we try to remember the emperor's new clothes, and if the emperor walked in the street naked, and everybody cheer him because nobody can say anything to him or her because it's the emperor. So the encouragement serve another purpose in that situation. So encouragement maybe is not universal good.
No, that's true. it depends on the delivery of the encouragement, maybe how you say it, from what perspective, because what if you are in a position you don't really need encouragement and someone gives it to you, it kind of makes you feel like condescended maybe. And I know in a lot of sort of alpha male or women circles, encouragement is like, it can seem condescending. So I think it's very important to see how you should deliver encouragement. Maybe you shouldn't deliver encouragement to someone who is consistently. It's difficult to say. You have
maybe something like this. You don't want encouragement in your lowest state of mind or in your lowest moment, because if you encourage someone, and I have felt it by myself also, when someone encourages you in a situation where you're not sure if you want to do something or if you can do something, then the encouragement being felt pushy.
Yeah, definitely. And
there comes the empathy, I think.
Yeah, and the ability to communicate humbly. But people respond differently to encourage. But an environment that inspires good characteristics and attributes could, for example, be a very learning environment. I think that's like one key word in order to create a good environment. Let's play with the idea of putting together 5 people and see that as the beginning of a culture. And what do you want in your culture? Let's say you want conscientiousness, you want discipline, you want creativity, and you want independence. And you have to pick people who stand out in those definitions by virtue of how they behave. And then you have to tie these people together through a common vision in order to sustain the culture, something that benefits them all. But I think I'm digressing a bit and going a bit too strategically at one specific group. But I think it's definitely necessary to create a culture that will embrace and accept all kinds of people, yet be going in one direction. Does that make sense?
Well, yes, but and I guess we see that in different kind of companies and organizations. But how do the individual response to that? Because the individual have a culture also.
Yeah.
Because maybe you work in a big company and you know the culture there, but maybe you don't live by those roles when you are at home, or maybe you do.
So basically, it's about integrating different people. I would say that's probably another key word that you should think about when you think about culture. You have to integrate individuals. So I think, I can definitely see that point. So how do you integrate people that are different in a culture? Well, I mean,
by letting everyone accept that difference is a strength in that context, I would say.
Absolutely. Seems like there's a lot of sub-culture groups, because a lot of ideologies, religions, and political parties and whatever has tried to create specific groups for small groups, or specific cultures for specific groups. And this creates like a sort of tribal mentality, like a sort of group war almost, groups competing for attention and fame and whatever. So definitely embracing difference to integrate a lot of different things into one culture. But I think one part that leads to that, like a healthy integration of different kinds of group, is not predeterminedly defining what everyone should stand for, but how each individual can contribute to one thing, one goal, one
or many,
yeah. True. But to align people to I mean, essentially, almost sometimes I think the only problem that is really here is that people can't seem to cooperate. Everyone, because there's a downside to individuality too. If you're like so individualistic that you're not willing to adapt in order to effectively meet people where they are at and speak to them in a way they would like to be spoken to. If you're so obsessed with being your individual self, sometimes you can get so extreme in terms of maintaining your way of being when life is about more people than you, and you have to adapt. So I think individuality can be taken a little bit to an extreme also, and that generally makes the culture quite unbalanced, like in the Wall Street culture, for instance.
Well, I guess some people are introvert, and some people don't want to be in a group. I know I have a couple of friends at least that don't like to be amongst people and don't like to do things for a goal. For example, building a house. They don't want to participate in that because they like to do what they like to do.
Yeah.
And they don't like to be with people, but they like people, but they're feeling that it is stressful to be a part of something.
If you think about EOS, we have a lot of people involved that are like quite independent in terms of how they think, and not really having a proclivity towards groupthink, or like very individualistic people that are quite different from most, and we have a sort of outsider culture in a sense. So I mean, there is introverted cultures and there's extroverted cultures, of course. But I think what makes the most amount of sense is to have both, so that you can be introverted and extroverted.
Yeah,
but
I agree with
introverted
that.
people do need different kinds of environments to express themselves more creatively or freely or unconditionally. Whereas just extroverted folks seem to need a lot of, inspiration and motivation and events happening all the time outside of them to get going, maybe. So
yes, it's all about what we define as a good work, or what is a work, and what do we value in our society or in our group or in our family or in our city. What do we value that is good? Because that have changed a lot through the history.
Yeah, to build a culture on top of that is what you
build the culture with a variety of characters in that culture, because with a lot of different characters in a society, I think that we have a better chance to do something that is, I would not say amazing, but that is more positive and bring more meaning to that society.
Absolutely.
Because if we don't have different kind of characters in the society, then the society being more vulnerable to change.
Yeah, I think so too. If you don't share at least like 3 fundamental values, I don't think the culture can sustain itself in a long-term healthy way. So like, for instance, at many workspaces, you try to sort of impose a culture from high up down the chain to be in a certain way. But before that strategy was implemented, you didn't really find out like what are the common values with us that promote the culture and the people who are living inside of the culture. I mean, everyone contributes and creates culture, but in companies or organizations, for instance, the example of the culture is usually set from above by example, and sometimes there's not even a good example, and the sort of lower down departments have own little cultures and clusters and so on. But I mean, having different kinds of culture is inevitable, but at least a common value foundation for the culture, I think, is absolutely essential. And I think there is where a lot of problems with integration lies, a lot of problems with communication, because if you don't share value, you don't really share, in many cases, I think, the same sort of intent. And if your intention is not similar, in terms of, as you said, the good values, there will be like a beginning of the end, I think. You just need the foundational community of values in order to sustain any kind of. So thinking about those values a little bit, I mentioned like conscientiousness, for instance. You said humbleness, or maybe I did. Is there any other value you think should be in there to create an encouragement? Is also
knowledge.
That's a very good one. It's people consume knowledge differently. I mean, it can be text, video, sound, voice, etc. But knowledge, I think knowledge is it's very important to. I mean, in a way, knowledge will inform the culture. So if you take a group of people and you look at what sort of knowledge, like say 5 people in this apartment. We have 5 people in this apartment now, for example. And all of these people are interacting frequently, often, and and they will consciously or unconsciously create like a kind of culture. And that culture is basically influenced by what you said, which is knowledge. So in order to improve the culture of that group, you have to improve the input to the group, which is knowledge. So I was thinking, there are different kinds of domains of knowledge that is good for a culture, a group, or a people. And I would say wisdom, health, and leadership, those 3 pillars, if you like, of knowledge, is something that needs to get into that group in order to contribute to the culture in a long-term, strategic and beneficial way. So when you say knowledge, all my sort of passion goes up, because I really think that, a lot of people try to change the environment in order to change the culture, but it can basically be you have to change the very information and knowledge that the group of people consumes in order to create a healthy mindset in the group. So I think that what you just said, that is probably, according to me, one of the biggest weaknesses or vulnerabilities you can have if you're looking to create a healthy culture. If you don't feed the culture with knowledge that is meant to provoke, inspire, and motivate people, it's not going to sustain itself, I think.
Have you ever experienced a group that you have been in that have dissolved over time?
Dissolved over time?
I know I have.
Yeah, definitely. It seems to be a crucial part of life, just to I mean, everyone needs to grow out of certain groups as we grow up, but definitely many.
Did you remember how the first sign of that felt, or how that first red flag of, you don't maybe know it in the first, but you kind of see some red flags?
Yeah, I have many examples of that, but the overall feeling I got that made me see that this constellation I'm interacting in or being part of is not a long-term wise exposure or group I want to prioritize, has always been because the good values, as you said earlier, were not aligned. And I think self-interest usually is like the first thing I notice when a project or a group is beginning to descend in a way, or become compromised, because we do a lot of crazy shit for our self-interest. You know, we edit memories to suit our current understanding of ourselves, self-image. When self-interest dictates behavior, I mean, there's of course a rational self-interest and irrational self-interest. The rational self-interest usually don't only benefit you, but the people you interact with also, by virtue of how it benefits you. If you're benefited, you're gonna act better. So, yeah, I really think self-interest is one of those, you know, ghosts that haunt us all. And in a good culture, the self-interest is quite rational. Like, if you take self-help, for example, it's not selfish because it benefits the people you have closest to you by virtue of your self-improvement. So I think that self-improvement is another thing that should really stand up out in a culture. It should be a guiding principle to develop your intellect, your disciplines, your character traits. And that's really hard if there's two guys in the group who don't want to equally contribute, who don't want to participate or support. So self-interest is definitely one of those things that just fucks shit up, basically.
Yeah, and many times people maybe don't know why they are there, but they are interested in and see what's happening with this particular event. But I have seen that it's can only take one person to drop off, and then it's like sometimes like a chain, because if one link broke, then the whole chain is useless.
Particularly if that one link of the chain that sort of drops out is one that was respected and admired. That, like, if a leader in a given group is leaving, it usually ends because the leadership was not distributed.
It's being a vacuum.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the trust and the stability of the environment, which is usually in the leader, is gone, and now people feel maybe the challenge is too great or something. But I think also, though, in order to create a good culture, then you must create people that consider themselves as leaders as well. So there's not one or two leaders, but that there's a culture of assisting and supporting each other to reach new heights and abilities in their own personal leadership, which is their development, because that is, in a way, your duty as a human being, to make the most of this opportunity you have, this potential. So that's another hallmark, I think, for setting up a good culture.
Well, if you want to, if someone wants to start a group, I suggest that it may be good if you are more than, let's say, 5 people. It's good to split up people in groups the first part of the project or the event.
Is like 5 people like specific for some reason?
No, I just took it off the air.
Generally.
Yeah, but if it's many people, it can be 20 people, but it can be 10, it can be 8, it can be 3. But I guess it's much easier to get something done, especially if the people don't know each other. If there are small groups first, and maybe change that dynamic later in the process, depending on how the groups evolve.
True.
So if you want to be a leading figure, then you may have a bird view on that.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, putting people together in a strategic way, I think, is a very sort of important thing to consider when you're working in a group. And like, sometimes you can have a prevailing culture that's really good, but there is one rogue element in the group, like one individual, that can create a lot of like dissonance and discord and dysfunction and drama. And so culture, in a sense, needs to be protected. Obviously, you shouldn't exclude people unless you have a good merit to do so, because sometimes there are people in different stages and phases of life that are unsuited to be in a group because they will counteract the whole group. So there seems to be, I think it's important to be very mindful of the people you pick in a constellation to put together, because that's just a hard fact that is sometimes difficult to communicate about, because it is a little harsh that you shouldn't let people into a group if they are like compromised in a way, in terms of their like integrity and sense of responsibility and meaning and so on. So I think that's also one of the determining factors for a good culture. Pick people that really care about whatever is going on in that group. A culture of caring.
Yeah.
Basically, is best.
Yeah, because I think it's most not dangerous, but most bad if people beginning to pick on each other.
Yeah.
And like this feeling spreading.
Yeah, competition is therefore, like, I think, a dynamic in a culture or a group that is largely negative, the way I see it. Because if you're competing with people on your team, something is, the vision isn't clear, the goal isn't clear, or the values are not aligned. And this is very common in many workplaces in terms of the current and collectively accepted and allowed system. We compete instead of cooperate. And that's so we have an inherent evolutionary culture of competition. And this used to be, it was valid that such a thing would prevail because we had an environment that was about survival in a way it isn't today. We don't have to we don't have to compete in the same way anymore. Most people in the West.
Yeah, but when we have overflow of resources, but the less resources, the more competitive, I guess, people get, because people get more hungry without resources. But in other ways, I guess it's group against groups about resources.
Yeah, and also intangible stuff like fame and stuff like
that. But I think nowadays in this modern area, I think that thinking is like a little bit faded away because we have an overflow of many things, so people don't need to think about like, I must get the resources today.
No, which also leads to a culture of taking things for granted in many ways. Because if you're all set and if you are satisfied, chances are you maybe won't apply yourself as good as you can in terms of that point you mentioned earlier on, that you need a kind of challenge to stretch. You need a common sort of, or you just, maybe not even a common, but you need a culture of people who want to face up to issues and challenges and problems. I mean, essentially, life is about solving problems. Sometimes I think that's the purpose.
Yes, and what we have talked about now is just a small fraction of the whole culture, because culture is so many things, and it's a whole life, and it is history and future, and we have tried out many different kind of cultures through the history of man, and I wonder what comes in the future, because with all this space standards, and with all this space exploration, if we ever gonna go to Mars, if we ever gonna go to the moon, it seems like we are a bit further going to the moon, closer, I mean.
Yeah.
So what's gonna happen with the culture when we expand our knowledge of our surrounding in this way? Because a couple of thousand years ago, or just maybe a couple of hundred years ago, people didn't have such a big scope of the reality as we have today.
One thing a multiplanetary setup would create as a culture by necessity, I think, is a more long-term vision and understanding of things. And so I think that a lot of these very definitive, impactful changes, such as, machine learning, artificial intelligence, creating us as a space-bearing civilization, this must, and also the fact that there's a lot of works that will be automated, and people will have to find new ways to contribute to the system. And I have a sense, and I can observe a trend, that content creation will be a very sort of big market. I really think that creating content, because as we progress throughout civilization and engineering and technology, a lot of advancement will give us a lot of time, free time, and I think a lot of people will end up investing that time more in terms of like education and seeing things they've never seen, expanding their perspectives and things like that. And if you have like a culture of that sort of behavior, of expansion, if you have an expansive culture, I think things will play out a lot better. And so if you bring up space-bearing civilization and things like that, I really think that will definitely change the way we see ourselves.
Yes, for sure. But I come to think of one thing. What is meaning in perspective to other type of life that can be lived out, and what is life in what is meaning in life in the end time of the universe. And I was thinking of that it is a bug that living underground for 40 years, and after 40 years it comes up to the ground, climbs up a tree, and then they making babies, and then it crawls down again and maybe goes into the ground. But I was thinking of that long time they stay hidden just to survive, and what is meaning in that type of reality and mind. So
it's interesting.
So what is meaning there? And if we say we believe in that, it's always something new that humans must do to get meaning. So then if we survive and if everything goes fine, we say that humanity lives out the universe, and that is a very long time. But if we say we do that just for a thought experiment, and what is meaning then? Because we have already seen everything that can be seen, and we have done everything that can be done, and we have explored everything that we can do in this universe. So what would meaning be then? Would meaning be that now when we are so strong, the only meaning is that to have a meaning we can bury ourselves and make a time chest and sleep like the bug to the end time, and then when the end time is, then the meaning is to survive the end time, because then everything else have died out and we have just a black hole we can survive in.
There is a,
so what is meaning?
That's very interesting. I know there's a scientific field called cryonics that basically means you can freeze your billionaire body or whatever, and you can get woken up in like 20 years to see how it is then. So but what you're saying, from what I gather, is like basically the premise is like you can't when we can't learn, grow, and see anymore, what meaning is there? First of all, I don't accept the premise that we'll ever get to a point that this is it. We can't do more. We can't see. Everything has been done. So now I don't think that point is ever gonna happen. And but also, I mean, to think about, okay, so what if that would be the case? What is the meaning then? Is the only meaning of life to expand and get more and more and more and better and better? Is it always about a purpose? Sometimes I think about that deeply, and I think that a system needs a purpose, but life is, and that's kind of how I think about it sometimes. I think if we get so locked in to our productive evolutionary tendencies to improve and build all the time, we can't really stop and smell the flowers, or however you want to put it. So I think we can find a lot of meaning and purpose in doing essentially nothing also. That's when you can get ideas, that's when you can get surprised. That's when I woke up recently, but this morning, and I took a really cold shower. I do that every day now, and I don't think about anything when I'm doing it, and I usually leave the bathroom with like a good idea. So to me, I mean, I get a lot of purpose and meaning from allowing things to, like, you know, it's alright, it's a telephone here. I get a lot of purpose and meaning from putting pieces together, and I don't know how the puzzle will look, and I don't know if it's going to produce the answer. I hope it will, but I just love the process of putting things together and creating a bigger picture. And so I think that if you can fall in love with the process of doing, of effort and inspiration, life doesn't necessarily need so many purposes and goals and things like that, but it needs, you know, how much do you need to appreciate life?
Maybe you can devolve. Maybe you can go back to your most basic nature of yourself, and you can be totally happy. And because maybe you can find meaning in being better and more efficient, but maybe you also can find meaning in being lazy, don't need much, and happy, and being very good at being that.
You know, some people like to watch Keno or the lottery, and they have a lot of good times with their family or whatever. Some people, you know, there is for no one to say what makes a life meaningful. But one thing is sure is that the people you surround yourself will, to a large extent, determine how meaningful your life is felt as. And so, on the subject of culture, I think it's largely a manner of thinking of it in terms of an individual, like how do I create around myself a healthy, virtuous, wise, like constellation or intellectual orbit by who I surround myself with. Pick people with deep care, long-term thinking, and just, I think, despite all the problems, challenges, and issues we may face, I mean, I would be surprised to find someone on their deathbed not realizing that the most important thing during my stay here as life was the people I got to interact with and learn from, and that challenged me. And so it's like weird, but basically, in a way, the purpose of your life is other people, but it's also you.
Yeah, and it's so important to also recognize that even that troublesome times is also good.
Yes.
Because then you can see how good you are.
That's what I want in my culture. People that really can extract the value from challenges.
That we encourage people to failing forward.
Boom. There you got it. That is an excellent line.
I think we're gonna end on that mark.
Yeah.
And thank you for listening to EOS Podcast. And if you want to hear more about our podcasts, then you're going to You Needs Your Planet on YouTube, and you can click the like button. That would be very helpful.
So that's Your Planet Needs You, which is the name of our YouTube channel, and also visit eosprojects.com.
Or on Instagram, eos.p, and then you can check out the picture on our latest project.
Yes, so that is a little bit about culture and what we sometimes think about how to create healthy culture. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.